through the reduction of the energy bill, new installation for more efficient appliances, especially in France. We have been doing that. And last thing we did, it's on mainly on a small scale right now, but we believe that this will expand quite massively in the future. We build local communities where decentralized energy resources are shared amongst neighborhoods. So in a nutshell, I try to provide some of those examples to showcase that using technology is an opportunity to unlock value in a legacy model, actually. But we have to focus very much on the service that matters, not doing just technology for geeks. We need to develop network of alliances, because on our own we won't be able to make it happen. Build partnership and expand the reach to create this flywheel effect, which will drive to growth, actually.
Well, thank you. I would say the bridge between you and our next speaker is I worked on a project a few years ago. It was a poll of 9,000 people in multiple countries about why they would invest in smart homes. And lowering my utility bills was the main reason. They wanted to see those concrete savings. But this allows me to pivot to Marianthi Tatari of UNStudio, who is building a smart district. And obviously, we've 10-year history now of smart cities, a lot of investment in questionable gains of this. And of course, here in Canada, Sidewalk Toronto became only recently the latest large project to sort of stumble. But Marianthi, you're developing a project called Brainport Smart District in the Netherlands, which has a completely different approach to data governance. So I was hoping you could talk a bit about, how you're approaching data privacy, but also, how things like collecting the data of energy usage can then be basically repackaged and allow residents to understand what they're saving and what they're gaining, and how you might offer a path forward in terms of how we actually might build smart homes that people want to live in.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me here. Just to say a bit before coming to the point, to the very specific questions, it's I think quite good to understand the process that we are into with UNStudio. We think that we're giving this opportunity to work for the Brainport Smart District and to create a neighborhood, what we say, and to enable quality of life through technology. There are a couple of layers to that takes you to the question that you are asking, and this is mainly actually the European model of doing this kind of, having this kind of discussions, which is a very participatory model. What we were talking before about, Yonatan was talking about inclusive models. I would take it a bit in a larger framework where actually for this master plan, it's not about design in the architectural sense. It's more about designing the system, designing the bigger plan, designing the governance, and designing even how the shared responsibilities among the residents will be developed. There are a couple of topics that we bring together in the master plan, and actually just to say that the participatory model of the European way, let's say, it is not a very straightforward model. Maybe it's also slow in the beginning comparing to the North American standards, but we think that it has in the long term a better effect, because you invite people, but then when you invite people, you have to listen to them. And you have to do it from the beginning. And this is how the Brainport Smart District started. It started with institutions, with authorities, with companies, and also with residents. And they are all participating in this process where decisions are taken together. So there are 300 people that participate in the process that actually vote on decisions to be applied in the master plan. Just to give you a bit of a feeling, the master plan is about 150 hectares, 1,500 housing units. what we also want to bring together is also not only that it's a kind of a sterile housing community, but also it's a community, a neighborhood where you can also really promote live work, and kind of thinking of the health not only as physical health, but also as a social, as a mental health. We have really worked on the landscape as well. The landscape in terms of introducing a kind of productive landscape that can, of course, save water and be distributed later, but also can be part of the production of local food. So we looked also in the network where you usually look at the energy, what Amaury was saying, but also water, but we also looked at food and how could we have food also being produced there. So I'm just saying, making this introduction because, let's say, our part as UNStudio is mainly actually to create this community that, of course, introduces technology as well, technology as networks, technology as mobility. And then together with our daughter company called UNSense, and this is mainly relating to your question, while we are working on the master plan and creating the values of the master plan, so that the housing can be built by different and can be designed by different designers. There is a selected 100 homes that we work together with UNSense to develop the technology one step further. And there we created a system that it's also really focuses on the individual and there is like 3 layers. That is, of course, the layer of the urban built environment. There is a layer of consent, and there is a platform where you actually start gaining. And this gain, we see it very diverse. Because we want to relate it to the quality of life. So then say some people increase their quality of life by becoming healthier, by becoming more active, some by connecting, by some people by creating this productive landscape and making it work, and some people by saving money so that they can do also something else. We don't see only one way of doing things, and I think that this is also what makes it interesting for us as designers and as an architectural studio. But also when we hear the feedback of other, let's say, stakeholders and peers, that we find value in a design that doesn't have a very concrete way of how it will, conclude. We think that because this discussion is ongoing, this will also be ongoing, and I think it relates a bit to what Tatiana and Yonatan was saying from the construction point of view, but from us, it's more about how everything comes together in a more systems point of view.
Great. Thank you, Marianthi. And last but certainly not least, Steffan Jones, who's the Vice President of Innovation for the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, who gets to take on the overarching question of this which is, how do we pay for all of this? Or how does all of this allow us to lower payments? I'm curious, now that you've had a chance to listen to everyone here and to see these pieces of the stack, how does that then tie back into the overarching system of the financialization of housing, and also, again, how we basically get the money up front to pay for these different designs, installation of hardware, for long-term investment, et cetera. So I'm curious to what you take away from all of this.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, and thanks everyone for having me. So first of all, for those people who don't know, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation is in Canada what we call a Crown Corporation. We are a federal agency, so a government agency, although we have a different level of autonomy than a typical federal department would have. We sort of straddle the line between public and private, the private worlds. We have a commercial operation, so we generate mortgage insurance that generates a profit. We pay a dividend to the government. We also have an appropriations side of the business where we deliver government funding to develop affordable housing. And so we're a little bit of a mishmash. For our friends in the US, we're we're kind of the equivalent of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and HUD, but all under kind of one roof. That's the best analogy I can draw. And as I listen to this conversation and think about financing, so in recent years, the federal government in Canada has gotten back into the housing game. We've launched something called the National Housing Strategy, which is a $55 billion 10-year program, a supply-based program to generate new affordable housing in the market. We've roughly tapped the gap, the requirement for housing in Canada, somewhere between $250 and $400 billion. And so even at $55 billion, there's still a significant way to go. And we think a good chunk of that answer lies in the private market. We think there's plenty of capital available. Often we hear that there's a shortage of capital. We don't think that's the case. And particularly now, post-COVID, I think a lot of that capital has gone to the sidelines. And so we're doing some work to think about what are the barriers to that money flowing towards affordable housing, new forms of tenure, new forms of design, modular housing, 3D printed housing, that kind of thing. What are the barriers that are preventing that? How can we use digital and technology and data to overcome some of those barriers? How can we improve the ROI or make the ROI appealing enough that that money naturally flows there? We're looking at things like corporate social responsibility, ESG criteria, so environmental, social governance criteria, social impact investing. Those things are becoming hot topics, and we think there's clearly a space for affordable housing in there. And so we're doing a lot of work to think about how our role as the National Housing Agency in Canada can facilitate some of that. In our early work, I have seen, we talk about this concept of Nimbyism, so not in my backyard. And that traditionally has to do with, what people might perceive as social housing or a lower standard of housing being developed in their neighborhood. We've seen the same kind of mentality applied to new forms of design, new forms of tenure, a little bit of a reluctance for the industry to go there. The development of multi-unit buildings and developments is a little bit cookie cutter. It's sort of this, if it ain't broke, why fix it? We just keep doing the same old thing. And clearly we need to be doing some things very differently. And so we really are trying to unpack how do we draw that capital towards those kinds of things? And I don't think there's an easy answer, but I do know there's plenty of capital, and we are motivated to try and find solutions to that. One of the interesting programs that we have launching in the fall is something called the Housing Supply Challenge. So it's another government program. It's $300 million over 5 years, but it's meant to place competitions in the market so that the private sector can generate solutions to barriers to supply, whether that be municipal processes, data, certain segments of the market, so housing in the north in Canada, for example. How do we create financial incentives for the private market to come up with solutions that we can then leverage for the good of housing in Canada? So there's an example of a program that I think is hopefully going to generate some alternative financing options. The other interesting thing we're doing is we're really, with our partners at Accenture, so at CMHC, we've partnered with Accenture as our IT partner. And we're really exploring how we can use technology to unlock inefficiencies and redundancies in the housing system in Canada. So just to make that a little more real, one of the use cases we're exploring is, there's 12 million empty bedrooms in Canada. That's relatively easy supply to tap into and bring to market relatively quickly without the prolonged development, cycle that can precede a multi-unit development. In Toronto, it can take upwards of 5 to 7 years to build a multi-unit building. How do we bring that supply to market quickly? What kinds of incentives do we create there? Our first use case is taking two relatively vulnerable populations, so seniors and students. So you've got seniors who are overhoused, who want to age in place. Recently, through the COVID pandemic, we've had some challenges in Canada with our long-term care facilities. So there's benefit to aging in place. How do we provide that source of housing to students who are looking for an economical place to live? They can provide support around the house to the senior, even just companionship. So there's a sort of spin-off benefits in terms of health and well-being. How do we facilitate that through technology? So we're building an application to find ways to match those players together, supported by other technology that can provide the social service supports that you need to provide. when you bring multi-generations together. So there's a practical application of us trying to see how we can bring additional supply to market and house people more effectively, more quickly. I was remiss to say at the beginning of this that at CMHC in 2018, we refreshed the strategy for the organization. And so we anchored ourselves in this aspiration that we have that by 2030, everyone in Canada has a home that they can afford and that meets their needs. And by time bounding it, it created a level of urgency and brought to the forefront that things like technology and data and process, disrupting supply chain, making the process of bringing housing to market more quickly, more effectively, it just created the urgency to really focus on that. And so we are really focused on how do we generate supply relatively quickly. Of course, we've got the standard programs that support construction and development, part of the solution. We are also looking at other ways that we can creatively bring house people, across the housing spectrum.
Well, I look forward to the launch of Canadian B&B in 2021. The one problem with so many smart people is so little time, so we're going to jump right into audience questions. I say Mark Richardson has a great question here that I think really gets to what I wanted to ask is, how do we avoid having these ideas getting trapped in the pilot boutique phase for many years? How do we bake scalable solutions and faster deployment of innovations into the mainstream housing development process? This is something that several of you have already touched upon. Tatiana already talking a bit about trying to reinvent her practice. UNStudio has created UNSense as a spinoff. Yonatan's mentioned that Mosaic has its own general contractor. But yeah, particularly from people early in the conversation, if you could talk a bit more about how do we make sure this stuff promulgates? And there's a lot of discussion now about creating natively integrated full stack, basically housing development companies that can run all this process together, the financing, the construction, everything else. So does anyone else have any further thoughts on how do we not just innovate, construction tech or financing tech or any of that, but the process or the entire organization of home building as a meta practice? I will let anyone, and the first person to unmute jumps in. So Yonatan might have been first on the draw there, but please, anyone.
Should I address it? I mean, I have a sort of a quick answer, and I'll leave the stage to others as well. I think one of the challenges is how to intervene in a system that's extremely traditional. So how to not supersede any of the existing processes. And I think what we're trying to do with Mosaic is that none of the traditional streamline of design to construction is changed. It's just augmented. And I think that's a key to any change. The change, especially in construction, because it's so slow and so labor intensive, you cannot shake the tree too much. I mean, as it is, it's barely standing. So just, minimum change in the way processes are being done today.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I would also differentiate between scaling deep versus scaling wide. And there's no right or wrong answer to that, but I do think it's imperative that at least a modicum of scaling deep occurs before you start going wide. Get a sort of a critical mass and sort of prove out your solution beyond the MVP level before you start going too wide. And the second thing is, an organization like CMHC, what I've realized in the last year or so is that is brand matters. And I think if you can get the right combination of public-private partnerships, the right brand, the right sort of champion to see something through, it can certainly enable scaling. It doesn't solve it completely, but I think scaling is one of those age-old problems that most organizations, solutions, new ideas struggle with. But I think creating that right private-public partnership with the right branding and championship is critical to success.
And I will add one that it's way more ambitious, but I would like to think that we could find a way of not understanding profit as an economical one, but as a social one. So as society, changing that would allow us to really create more holistic solutions for housing, because otherwise it's very difficult. When it goes all back the end to a profit, then you're losing the qualities that you really need to implement.
Thank you. I just to expand upon this, I'd love to hear Amaury and Marianthi's thoughts on this as well, because particularly because the whole thing, of course, of housing is that it's so incredibly fragmented, right? I mean, I'm most familiar in the United States context, right, where I mean, there's almost very little architecture in housing per se. It's a product type that is sold through major, home builders, for example. So, there's not a lot of design innovation or a lot of integration in that. So, I mean, from ENGIE's perspective, Amaury, for example, and from Marianthi, like, how do you work with, these providers of this to actually get it pre-installed? I mean, it's not like you can sort of roll this out like a technology product, although that's exactly what many are trying, right? With prefabricated house designs and sort of trying to do that. Is that the solution, or how do we accelerate the scale of that?
I think that I think it's a very good question, and it's exactly what Greg says, that everyone in the panel is probably trying to do that. And I think that from what I heard today, there is a lot of ambition, and no one shies away from what's happening and what is the progress. And I think this is the important part, to make the next steps, that you're part of the discussion and you continue. And of course, not all technology will survive, and not every solution will go ahead. But it's more about trying to make sense out of all these parameters that play along, and then, let's say, the kind of the Dutch way of doing things is that the social and the business entrepreneurial has to happen together, so that you make it work. And I think that is also what I described a bit in our work, that in this master plan, that even though we create this overarching principles for the master plan, then we break it down to smaller components. So then it becomes, you don't have to solve everything at the same time. You start addressing and you start experimenting with maybe lowering your risk. But in the meantime, you also engage with different stakeholders, also governing bodies, to gain support, to also kind of make it bigger the next time. So it is about always this dialogue back and forth, I have to say, in our case. But it is also a very early case. It's not that, we have built the homes. And so it is what you are planning and what you are aiming. And then, of course, the aim is to take it next to another kind of the concept, to another kind of solution, maybe more urban, and then test it there again. And as the players are different, your solution is changing. This would be probably our approach.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Greg, on our side, I mean, we supply energy to millions of households, and just if you consider how much annual energy bill is worth, I mean, in Europe it's about 1,500, 200 euros per year. So if you multiply this figure to millions of homes, this is a massive amount of money, massive. And we strongly believe that we can actually use this money better than just paying for the electron, the grid, the marketing and sales cost, which is actually at the end very small compared to the total bill. And what we need to be able to do first is to use this massive amount of money differently, by financing new assets, decentralized generation, and so on, without increasing the end user bill at the end. And the second thing is what Steffan said is true. I mean, when we have something and we go deep, we also need to go deep in the commercialization of this solution. I mean, going 360 degrees, going through a pilot is super important, but at the end, you spend the same amount of effort than if you go big. And what we have seen on our side is that we have to move from a pilot towards a mass consumer good. We need to be able to communicate 360 degrees, which is a lot of investment, but it's needed. I mean, if a customer is walking to the street, he see an ad, he needs to take his phone, he needs to directly see what the offer looks like, directly call, have someone answer his phone with the right answer to his needs. And so this is what is key at the end is to have a product, channels, and a strong value proposition.
Thank you. Ryan Kolker has a question here. What role do you see codes and standards playing in helping the transition, the international code councils in the process of developing standards to support offsite construction? To expand upon that, obviously that relates, of course, partly to the sort of prefabrication and efforts to sort of build components offsite. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm sort of also curious about sort of larger modularity or where that goes. I imagine Tatiana and Yonatan could speak to that. I mean, that's very much, I mean, you know, Mosaic's trying to update, you know, Christopher Alexander's a pattern language and its concepts to create this. So yeah, where is modularity ultimately going with this, and what is the complete potential of modularity and building standards for this, or developing new standards for construction, et cetera? Yonatan, you first, I guess. You're unmuted.
Ah, okay. Sorry. So Mosaic is not focused in any way on modularity, and I think the problem, or the challenges we face with modularity is that it requires a factory, and factories have huge overheads, and they're not flexible to the volatile real estate market. So, you know, when there's a boom, it's fantastic. You churn these modules out, but when there's a bust, you have a full factory that you have to survive the drought. So again, that sort of strengthens in my mind the flexibility of people. You know, they can change their abilities, they can change their location. Yeah.
Thank you, Tatiana.
In terms of codes, I was thinking in terms of maybe I thought the question as in terms of policy codes and as construction codes, etc. I think that is really key to change, to produce a change. In Mexico, for example, when we did our modular house, it was really off limits of the code. It took us 5 years to being able to make the necessary adjustments and on the other hand convince the authorities of the interpretation of a specific code to really be able to get it checked. We finally did last year. We started 5 years ago with it. So I think that it is really absolutely necessary that codes change and are able to understand and be more flexible with the potential individual expression of each place, you know, and not only every individual, but also every place, as was mentioned in some other. But I think that needs to become part of like one of the first things that have to change, at least in my country. I don't know in other ones, but here it really does.
Thank you. We only have a few minutes left. We might run a little bit over before we go to the networking room, but I want to do a quick lightning round, and we'll go at least we'll go clockwise on my screen, which starts with Marianthi. I don't know if it's universal here, our tiling. But the question I want to pose to each of you is, given your respective roles in sort of the ecosystem, what entity, corporate, government, quasi-government, would you most like to partner with? What you know, is it Apple? Is it Google? Is it a foreign government? Is it a major developer, et cetera? Are you most intrigued by, or would you like to most partner with, do you think could accelerate your own efforts to create change in sort of the housing construction and provisioning system? So Marianthi, who would be your dream collaborator, or UNStudio's dream collaborator?
Yeah. This is I really think, Greg, I will maybe disappoint you because I don't have one. I think that it has to be a collaboration. I really think so, and we really think so, because you have seen also examples. It has to be clients with innovative thinking, exactly what Steffan said, also residents or like people with willing to go for it, clients willing to go for it, and government as well. If we work together, then we make it happen. And I think that, and also the more it becomes spread, and I like that you created this panel in a discussion that is more North American, because the more we kind of interchange, then you also get, maybe this is also the way to accelerate, rather than going one way, that you also exchange a lot across continents, countries, and experiences.
Well, that is well said, and that is the correct answer. But I want to get to the point for my remaining panelists here who have to answer this. The spirit of this is not almost, who is the silver bullet that can change everything. It's more the notion of who is the biggest bottleneck or stumbling block whose neck you need to wring to actually unlock the rest of this. So I'd be curious almost in a way of like, who is the partner that you would love to get in there to beat some sense into them that could help unlock all of this? So Tatiana, you're next here in the clockwise circle. You unmute.
Well, I don't think, again, like Marianthi said, it's not about one silver bullet. It's impossible. And I read that Steffan was also saying that code changes are like at snail pace, at least in Canada, I think everywhere. I think it's a whole system, no, that we all need to get together to really, all of us that we are convinced that we need to change, really need to get together to change it. And I think that that's the only way. It's not neither the government, neither a company, neither one person. It's a society at large.
All right. Well, next time I host this panel, I'm going to get some Silicon Valley startup bros who will play this game the way it's meant to be played here, which is the easy answers and easy solutions. But I guess for the sake of completion, Steffan, as a Royal Crown Corporation, I bet you do have an answer in this, and obviously you do work with a number of entities. So who would you love to play with?
So I'm gonna offer two. So one would be deep-pocketed pension funds, the Googles of the world who I've seen step into housing in other parts of the world. I'd like to get some of that in Canada, and so that's one answer. And then the second one would be Airbnb. They have traditionally been viewed as a little bit of the enemy to long-term housing stock by removing housing stock from the market. I don't think they're going away. And so the question is, how do we work together to find a happy medium that results in more affordable housing, but also serves a purpose for them as well? So Airbnb would be somebody.
Making Airbnb play nice with others is a very tall order. Thank you for respecting the spirit of the challenge. Yonatan, you're next. As an actual Silicon Valley-backed company, yes, I know you have an answer for this.
I don't have the smart answer. The quick answer is that our only limitations is our abilities at this point. We could partner up with more regional home builders, mid-sized home builders, but there's nothing is keeping us back. Actually, it's this. How did Steffan mention it? It's this scaling deep, right? Understanding the ability of the technology, which is the stage we're at right now.
Well, a quick follow-up to that: who is most threatened by your technology? Who is your natural prey? Then, I mean, is it Toll Brothers? Is it some of the big home builders out there, or other general contractors?
It's a good question. My gut feeling is that because we're not home builders, we're GCs, so we're not actually competing with them. Who are we competing against? It's a good question.
I bet your VCs love that, just blue ocean strategy. And then Amaury, the last one of this again, which comes back to it of who could you partner with that would allow you the fastest deployment of widespread solar tech?
Yeah, I guess the answer will depend on what was the day. So which challenge we try to tackle today, because as the rest of the panel, I believe in an ecosystem of partnership with different types of players. But for us, what is certain is that we need every piece of hardware being connected to the internet in order to be able to get those insights and unlock actually new routes to customers. And of course, we directly think about tech giants like Google, Apple, that are today building those chips that make this connection with the internet. So definitely those GAFAs.
Well, thank you to all panelists for the speed round here and accurately reflecting the complexity of what it is we're discussing here. But thank you to all. This has been a fantastic session, everything I hoped it would be in terms of figuring out how to advance all of this at once. I just want to call two things to the audience's attention before we depart. One, Steffan and CMHC is running a workshop tomorrow on their supply challenge, so I would encourage you all to sign up for that if you haven't already. I'm not sure what the status of that is, but they're going to walk through how they plan to run that. So there you go. And second, if you're free now, I would encourage you all, when you log off of this, to log back into our networking breakout, where we're going to be joined by Leslie Kern, who's the author of the new book, The Feminist City, which is going to, of course, explore, how do we make cities reflective of women, families, et cetera, and rethinking the design of cities, which, of course, includes housing. So, again, thank you to Marianthi, Tatiana, Steffan, Yonatan, and Amaury. It's been a pleasure, and thank you all so much.
Thank you.